The lights of the Seattle skyline were a million glittering promises, reflecting perfectly in the glass of their penthouse living room. Mark watched his wife, Clara, smiling effortlessly as she finalized the guest list for their anniversary gala. A portrait of a perfect marriage, framed in wealth and success. But his fingers, tracing the cool glass of his scotch, still felt the ghost of a message he deleted an hour ago. "Meet me tomorrow. I have to tell you the truth." There is always a hairline fracture in the foundation of everything beautiful, a secret that threatens to swallow the glittering promise whole. If these slices of fragile, dangerous emotion resonate with you, stay with me. There are so many doors yet to be opened in this story. The air in the penthouse was too clean, too still. It smelled faintly of lilies and the expensive, understated cologne Clara insisted Mark wear, a scent designed for corner offices and yacht decks. From their 35th floor view, the Seattle Mite felt like a polished gemstone, all glittering, unreachable perfection. Mark stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, the reflection of the city's lights doing nothing to warm the chill he felt. Clara was in her study, a glass of Sancerre cooling beside her. She was cross-referencing names for their 10th anniversary party, a meticulously planned event that had become a performance, not a celebration. Her focus was absolute, her pen moving with the crisp precision of a corporate lawyer closing a high-stakes merger. "Mark, darling," she called out, her voice not unkind but measured, like a court ruling. "We simply must invite Senator Thorne. His endorsement for your venture fund will seal the deal with the New York trustees." "Of course, Clara," Mark replied, the words a reflex, devoid of true meaning. The success of Ashton Capital was Clara's project as much as his, a mutual edifice they had built brick by expensive brick, using ambition as the mortar. They were a brand, a partnership, highly profitable and aesthetically faultless. The only thing missing was the messy, unpredictable element of genuine human connection. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the delete button in his text history. The message had arrived precisely at 11:37 p.m., a jagged disruption in the calm electronic silence of his evening. "Meet me tomorrow, usual cafe, 10 a.m. I have to tell you the truth." The sender was Nora Hayes, a name that tasted like a dangerous, necessary secret. She was an investigative journalist, a decade his younger, whom he had met on a conference circuit in Chicago. Their affair had been a fragile thing, woven from stolen moments in bland hotel rooms and late-night, conscience-stripping emails. It wasn't about sex so much as it was about escape, a conversation that felt real, a shared silence that didn't demand a performance. Mark deleted the message, watching the digital evidence vanish, but the words were already burned into his memory. The truth. That single phrase felt massive, an anvil dropped from the sky. His mind spun through the possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. A public confrontation, a pregnancy, a confession to Clara. All of them ended the same way, the polished veneer of their life cracking, shattering on the cold marble floor of their success. He walked into the study. Clara looked up, her blue eyes sharp but affectionate. "Trouble at the firm, Mark? You look tired." "Just closing up the Rilke deal," he lied easily. He leaned down and placed a dutiful kiss on her cheek. It was a gesture of ownership, of maintenance. Her skin felt cool, firm, and faintly scented with expensive night cream, the texture of an untouchable artifact. "You're doing wonderfully," Clara murmured as she turned back to her list. "I'm proud of what we've built." What we've built. That was the language of their marriage. Mark retreated to the balcony, needing the cold, dense air of the city to ground him. He knew that what he was doing wasn't just cheating, it was a moral erosion. But in Nora's presence, he felt an uncomfortable, electric sense of self he'd forgotten existed beneath the weight of his career and Clara's expectations. The truth, whatever it was coming. It felt like a privilege and a death sentence wrapped in the same velvet cloth. He closed his eyes, hearing the distant, muted siren song of an ambulance on the freeway below. The city was full of secrets, and tomorrow one of his would finally break the surface. The cafe, the quiet hour, was an architectural paradox. Floor-to-ceiling glass on a busy downtown street, yet designed with low, soft lighting and acoustic dampening to absorb the city's frantic energy. It was a place for hushed deals and private revelations, which was exactly why Mark and Nora had established it as their meeting ground. Mark arrived at 9:58 a.m. He chose a small, dark table in the back corner, positioned so he could observe the entrance without being easily seen. The scent of dark roast and warm pastry hung heavy in the air, but the aroma did nothing to ease the tightness in his chest. He ordered a black coffee, the ritual grounding him slightly. He felt like an attorney prepping for a difficult cross-examination, his mind already formulating defenses against the potential emotional attack he anticipated from Nora. She walked in exactly at 10. Unlike Clara, who wore her power in perfectly tailored silk and leather, Nora was dressed in muted, practical layers, a dark trench coat and a simple turtleneck, the uniform of someone who didn't need to project authority to possess it. Her auburn hair was pulled back severely, exposing a face that seemed paler, the deep green of her eyes troubled. The sight of her struck him not with desire, but with a profound, terrifying recognition of what he had risked. "Nora," he said, his voice low, a conspiratorial sound. He didn't stand. He simply gestured to the seat across from him. "Nora." Her voice was flat, professional. She didn't offer a polite smile or the charged look they usually exchanged, the acknowledgement of the illicit, consuming bond they shared. She ordered an herbal tea, a gesture that felt oddly distant and ascetic. Mark couldn't wait. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the cold marble tabletop. "The message last night, what is it? Tell me directly. Is it about us?" Nora lifted her eyes to meet his. There was a hardness there he had never seen, an ethical steel that cut through the romanticized fog of their affair. "It is about us, yes, but not in the way you're thinking." She paused, tracing the rim of her teacup with a fingernail that was clipped short, unpolished. "I'm the key source for the Times piece on Ashton Capital," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it landed in the quiet room with the force of a gunshot. Mark stared. The mundane details of the cafe, the hiss of the espresso machine, the quiet chatter of an adjacent table suddenly sounded deafening and irrelevant. He thought he must have misheard, or she was attempting a bizarre, manipulative joke. "What in God's name are you talking about?" "The investigation has been running for 8 weeks. It's about the ethical lapses in your last 3 funding rounds, the shell companies, the inflated valuations, and the disregard for the regulatory filings on the Zeller acquisition." She spoke quickly, clinically, listing the sensitive, potentially criminal details of his firm's operations as easily as reciting a shopping list. The blood drained from Mark's face. He knew she was an investigative journalist. It was one of the things that had initially drawn him to her sharp mind and her genuine moral outrage. But he had compartmentalized that, viewing it as a romantic ideal, harmless to his real life. He realized with a sickening jolt that in their unguarded, late-night conversations, fueled by wine and an intoxicating sense of privacy, he had been careless. He hadn't confessed their crimes, but he had provided context, timelines, and subtle confirmations of the firm's internal chaos. He had treated the intellectual intimacy as emotional release, never realizing he was giving an adversary the ammunition she needed. "You used me," Mark stated, the words tasting metallic. It wasn't a question. It was the moment the affair wasn't just adultery, but professional treason. Nora shook her head, a gesture of deep, weary remorse. "I didn't seek you out for this. I met you, and I genuinely connected with you. But when I got the initial tip, the pieces started falling into place. Things you had mentioned casually, context that only an insider would have. I tried to walk away, Mark. I tried to separate the 2 lives, but I couldn't." She looked genuinely tormented. "I have to live with myself. The sheer greed and recklessness of your partners. You know how bad it is." Mark looked past her, through the window, to the oblivious flow of people on the street. They were walking toward their jobs, their coffee, their routine, unaware that his entire reality had just dissolved. This was infinitely worse than a divorce. This was the end of his reputation, the annihilation of his life's work, the potential loss of everything Clara valued. "You're going to run the story?" he asked, his voice now dangerously soft. "It goes to print in 72 hours. I came here to tell you out of respect for what we had, not to ask your permission, not to stop it, just so you aren't blindsided." Mark looked at her, seeing not the lover, but the catalyst for his professional execution. The truth wasn't a pregnancy, it was a subpoena waiting to happen. He understood in that instant that his attempt to escape the gilded cage of his marriage with an honest connection had only given Nora the key to lock him out of his own life completely.
The silence that followed Nora's devastating announcement was thick and corrosive. Mark stared at the condensation forming a wet ring beneath his coffee cup, seeing the edges of his life dissolving in the spreading moisture. His mind, trained for decades in high-stakes negotiation, rejected panic and instead latched onto a solution, a corporate exit strategy. "Nora, listen to me," he began, his voice dropping to the low, controlled register he used when talking down a volatile investor. "I understand your position, your need for integrity. I respect it. But this isn't just a scoop. This is career-ending for me, and it will be messy for you. You're talking about a firm with billions under management, with DC connections. They will come after you with everything they have." Nora lifted her hand, a gesture of quiet, final dismissal. "I'm prepared for that, Mark. That's the price of investigative journalism." "The price is too high," he insisted. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers briefly, injecting a flicker of their shared clandestine history into the purely transactional conversation. "Nora, listen to me," he began, his voice dropping to the low-controlled register he used when cocking down a volatile investor. "I understand your position, your need for integrity. I respect it. But this isn't just a scoop. This is career-ending for me, and it will be messy for you. You're talking about a firm with billions under management, with DC connections. They will come after you with everything they have." Nora lifted her hand, a gesture of quiet, final dismissal. "I'm prepared for that, Mark. That's the price of investigative journalism." "The price is too high," he insisted. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers briefly, injecting a flicker of their shared clandestine history into the purely transactional conversation. "Don't do this. I can make this right. For us." He tried to meet her eyes, searching for the soft vulnerability that had always been his undoing and his weapon. "What do you need? A sabbatical? Enough capital to fund your own nonprofit newsroom? I can set up a fund, anonymously, enough money that you never have to worry about a paycheck again. You pull the article and you walk away with your integrity intact and your future secured." It was the ultimate corporate move. Buy the problem, silence the source, use wealth to negate morality. Nora pulled her hand away, slowly but definitively, breaking the last physical link between them. The rejection wasn't emotional, it was ethical. "That's what I mean, Mark. That's exactly what the story is about, that you and your partners think every problem, every person, every moral crisis has a price tag." She leaned back, resting against the cool, dark wood of the booth. The change in her demeanor was profound. The woman who had shared his secrets, who had listened to his darkest professional fears, was gone. In her place was a journalist committed to the truth, a person Mark realized he had profoundly underestimated and misunderstood. "You're still operating on the premise that I'm doing this out of spite or for money," Nora continued, her voice clear and without accusation. "I'm doing this because Zeller was a toxic company that laid off 2,000 people based on inflated reports your firm manufactured. I'm doing this because I can't sleep at night knowing I'm the only person who can stop this story from being buried by your lawyers." Her words hit him with a sickening clarity. He hadn't just betrayed Clara, he had, in a more profound way, betrayed Nora's faith in him as a decent man. She had seen him as a potential source of light in a dark industry, and he confirmed he was part of the darkness. He slumped back in his seat, the heat of his anger replaced by the crushing weight of reality. The professional threat was real, and it was coming from the person who knew him best, professionally and personally. The stakes were everything: his decade-long marriage to Clara, built on financial and social mutual interest, his partnership at the firm, and his entire identity as a successful man. "And Clara?" he asked, the name a whisper. Does she know what you're about to do to me? Will you make sure she knows about us too? Nora met his gaze, showing a sliver of the old intimacy, a look of pity. Clara doesn't matter to the article. Our relationship is irrelevant to the crimes of Ashton Capital. I am not going to weaponize our affair for petty revenge. But Mark, when that story breaks, your wife is a very intelligent lawyer. She will connect the dots quickly enough on her own. He knew she was right. Clara would not weep over the infidelity. She would calculate the reputational damage and the legal exposure. The cold reality was that Nora's professional decision was far more destructive to his life with Clara than the affair itself ever could be. Mark pushed his empty coffee cup away. The time for negotiation was over. He was trapped between two impossible choices: destroy Nora and confirm his own ethical corruption, or sacrifice everything he had worked for and face the inevitable, calculated fury of his wife. As he walked out of the quiet hour, leaving Nora sitting alone with her cooling herbal tea, the bustling city felt less like a backdrop for his success and more like a jury gathering for his judgment.
The penthouse was exactly as Mark had left it, perhaps even more perfect. The housekeeper had been through, smoothing the silk throw on the sofa and straightening the art books on the marble coffee table. The air was heavy with the scent of the lilies, a funereal sweetness that suddenly suffocated him. He found Clara in the kitchen, not cooking, she never cooked, but directing their personal chef on the plating of a delicate scallop dish. "Mark, you're late," Clara said, glancing at the Swiss watch on her wrist. The statement was not an accusation of tardiness, but a recording of a deviation from their meticulously structured evening schedule. "I told Robert 6:30 for dinner. The Rilke deal must be taking a toll." Mark forced a weary smile. "It's complex, yes. More complex than I anticipated." The complexity was existential, not contractual. He went to the bar, pouring himself a bourbon, a double, neat, ignoring the ice. Dinner was served at the glass dining table overlooking the glittering grid of the city. The 3 courses were exquisite, small works of edible art, but Mark chewed without tasting. The silence between them was not comfortable. It was the heavy silence of 2 people who had run out of authentic things to say years ago, relying instead on shared ambition and social proximity. Clara, impeccable in a sleeveless black dress, talked about the gala. She discussed seating arrangements, who needed to be seen with whom, which trustee was prone to drinking too much, and the crucial placement of the senator. Her mind was a tactical chessboard, always several moves ahead, prioritizing optics and influence. "I think the theme should lean into enduring legacy," she mused, cutting a sliver of scallop with absolute focus. "It suggests stability, something the market appreciates." Mark watched her. Her ambition, once the magnetic force that drew him in, now felt like a cold, impenetrable shield. He realized the sheer impossibility of telling her the truth, that his legacy was about to be obliterated by a journalist she would deem nothing more than an inconvenient distraction. The idea of her reaction, the anger, the disappointment, the calculation, was physically paralyzing. Clara wouldn't rage about the affair. She would dissect the professional incompetence. She would demand to know how he had let his judgment be so clouded, not by desire, but by carelessness. He opened his mouth, the words hovering. "Clara, I've made a mistake, a huge one. I was talking to Nora and she's running an exposé on the firm." But the words never came out. Instead, he heard himself say, "The legacy will be fine, solid as a rock." It was a lie to save himself from the instant execution he knew her reaction would entail. He couldn't bear to see the look of intellectual contempt in her eyes. Later, as they prepared for bed, the physical distance was as vast as the emotional one. Their master suite was cavernous, designed with clinical, modern lines. Mark watched Clara move through her elaborate nighttime routine, a ritual of preservation. She applied various serums and creams, preparing her skin, her body, her image for another day of high-performance living. They slipped under the fret sheets on opposite sides of the king bed. The silence returned, more charged now. Mark lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the phantom presence of Nora's words from the cafe, the sheer greed and recklessness of your partners, and his own careless complicity. He yearned for the honesty he'd found in the affair, the messy, dangerous reality that made him feel alive. Yet he was utterly trapped by the fear of his perfect wife. Clara, perhaps sensing the unusual tension emanating from him, shifted slightly. "Are you sure you're all right, Mark? I'm feeling a little chill." "I'm fine," he murmured, pulling the blanket tighter around his own side. She didn't press. She never did. In their marriage, intimacy was not about vulnerability. It was about the efficient, quiet maintenance of the status quo. She turned away from him, her breathing evening out quickly. Mark stayed awake, listening to the regulated sound of her sleep, a sound that confirmed her peace and his total solitude. He knew he had less than 72 hours to prevent the story from running, and he had just missed the last chance to prepare the only person who shared the collateral damage, his wife.
The morning after the silent dinner, Mark sat in his corner office, the 38th floor of the downtown tower, feeling less like a fortress and more like a mausoleum. The city sparkled outside, a picture of aggressive capitalism he was supposed to be mastering, but his focus was splintered. He was due on a video conference in 20 minutes, but his hand kept reaching for his phone, resting in the drawer beside his Mont Blanc pen. He couldn't save his career by crushing Nora. He had seen the ethical steel in her eyes at the cafe. Trying to bribe her would only solidify her resolve and potentially give her firm a secondary story about corporate intimidation. Moreover, the deep, hollow guilt he felt wasn't just about the affair. It was about the years of complicity in the firm's reckless actions, the quiet, ethical compromises that had built this empire. The impending exposure felt less like a catastrophe and more like a necessary amputation. He pulled the phone out and opened a secure messaging app he and Nora had used for the affair, anonymized, encrypted, and now pre-purposed for professional treason. He typed out a message, deleted it 3 times before settling on a blunt demand. "I need to talk to you, not about the money, about the story. Now." The reply was instantaneous, almost challenging. "I told you, Mark, I am done talking. I have a deadline. I respect you, but not enough to compromise my work." "I'm not asking you to compromise it. I'm offering to expand it." A long pause, punctuated by the dull, rhythmic hum of the building's ventilation system. He watched the 3 pulsating dots on the screen with frantic intensity. "Expand how?" "Your article is good, but it's only a fraction. It focuses on Zeller. What about the systemic valuation fraud? What about the shadow fund we used to bypass SEC disclosure rules on the Meridian acquisition? The paper trail is worse than you think. I can give you the details. I can give you the primary source evidence." The ellipsis dots vanished, and then a single stunned word appeared. "Why?" Mark leaned back, running a tired hand through his hair. The why was too complex to articulate in a text box. It was a cocktail of self-loathing and a desperate need to reclaim some small part of his moral footing. It was the realization that the gilded life Clara had demanded was also the one he most desperately wanted to dismantle. It was the only way left to impress Nora, not as a lover, but as a human being. "Because I'm tired of the lies. The firm needs to be accountable. I need to be accountable. This is the only way out for me. But I need to talk to your editor, not just you. I need to control the narrative of my confession." Another agonizing pause. Mark could almost picture Nora sitting in some small, cluttered newsroom or anonymous apartment, grappling with the sheer audacity of his offer. A high-level executive walking into the lion's den not to beg for mercy, but to provide the knife for his own ritualistic execution. "You want to voluntarily destroy yourself." "I want to save whatever is left of the man you were once interested in. Can you arrange the meeting? Today?" "I will call my editor, Andrew. He will want to vet your motives, Mark. This is either the biggest corporate confession we've seen in years or the most sophisticated trap. I need you to understand that once you walk into that office, there is no going back. Clara will never forgive this level of exposure, not the affair, but the self-immolation." "I know. Just send me the time and address."
He closed the app, the decision made. The terrifying relief that washed over him was the first honest feeling he had experienced since he and Clara had signed their prenuptial agreement a decade ago. It wasn't about love or success anymore. It was about choosing the hardest, steepest path simply because it led away from the perfect, suffocating life he had built on a foundation of lies. He had chosen truth over prestige, and the cost would be calculated by Clara. The screen lit up with the coordinates. A downtown office, 4 hours from now. He stood up, grabbed his jacket, and walked past the perfectly organized desk toward the elevator. The video conference would have to wait. The self-destruction could not. He didn't text Clara or leave a note. The silence of his departure felt like the ultimate, final insult.
The Times Seattle bureau felt nothing like the sterile, high-tech fortress of Ashton Capital. It was utilitarian, slightly worn, and humming with the low, focused energy of genuine work. Mark was led into a small, windowless conference room. The walls were covered in whiteboards, scribbled with cryptic notes and organizational charts that bore no resemblance to the polished presentation decks he was accustomed to. Nora was already there, sitting beside a middle-aged man with sharp, skeptical eyes and an air of quiet authority. Andrew Bell, the investigative editor. Andrew didn't offer a handshake. He merely pointed to a chair across the steel table. "Mr. Ashton, you have 45 minutes. My understanding is that you're here to kill a story about your firm by offering us a better, self-incriminating one. Is that accurate?" Mark placed a slim, encrypted USB drive on the table. It was the only artifact he had brought from his office containing months of confidential internal memos and communications. He ignored the question's cynicism. "It's accurate that I want the truth out, Mr. Bell. Nora's initial story on Zeller is correct. Inflated valuations, fraudulent reporting. But it's the tip of the iceberg. I'm here to give you the whole ship." Andrew leaned back, arms crossed. "Why? You're risking everything. Your marriage, your position, potential criminal exposure. You're sacrificing a 9-figure net worth. Most men in your position try to buy us off." "I tried that," Mark admitted, looking briefly at Nora, who flinched slightly at the raw honesty. She refused, and she was right to refuse. He turned back to Andrew, his voice gaining a clear, resolute tone. "I've spent the last decade building a legacy that is hollow. My marriage is a partnership based on maintaining that image. The affair, with Nora, was my first taste of authenticity, and when she told me she was running the story, I realized the only honest thing left I could do was tear the whole edifice down." He pushed the USB drive forward. "This drive contains primary source evidence, direct communications, and audit trails detailing the shadow funding structure we used for the Meridian acquisition 2 years ago. We established a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands to offload risk right before the market correction. That move alone exposed our pension fund investors to billions in unforeseen losses. It's fraud, Mr. Bell. It's systemic, and it implicates the entire senior partnership. Starting with me." Andrew's skeptical posture began to crumble, replaced by the excited intensity of a seasoned journalist recognizing a seismic scoop. He glanced at Nora, a silent acknowledgement of her sources and her integrity. "If we run this, Mr. Ashton, your firm will collapse. You know that, right? And your wife will be legally obligated to distance herself. This is professional and personal annihilation." Clara will be shocked, yes. The word shocked, echoing the title, but now redefined. She won't be shocked by the fraud. She'll be shocked by my choice to expose it. She won't understand sacrificing status for principle. He looked at Nora again, a final, shared moment of silent confession. "This isn't about protecting me. It's about making a choice I should have made years ago. I'm providing this evidence under the condition that Nora, and Nora only, takes the lead on this expanded article. She's earned it." Andrew nodded slowly, grabbing the drive. The interrogation was over. The alliance was sealed. "Get ready, Mark. By tomorrow morning, your life and the market will look very different." As Mark stood up, Nora finally spoke, her voice low. "Mark, you didn't have to do this." He gave her a tired, genuine smile, a smile he hadn't shown Clara in years. "Yes, I did. I had to stop being the man who had to lie to be loved. I'll face the consequences." He walked out of the sparse room,
leaving the drive and his entire former life on the cold steel table. The air outside felt colder, but cleaner. Clara was commanding the boardroom. The atmosphere in the Seattle law firm Hastings & Price was a mix of intense focus and subdued intimidation, exactly how Clara liked it. She was arguing the finer points of corporate liability in a massive class action suit, her voice sharp and precise, her suit jacket a flawless structure of charcoal wool. She was winning, dismantling the opposing counsel's argument with surgical elegance. She paused, mid-sentence, when the first muted alarm began to chime. Not her phone, but the collective phones of the junior partners and analysts around the long mahogany table. A ripple of nervous energy moved through the room, the silent disruption of the digital age. Most were discreetly turning off their notifications, but one analyst, a young man named Ethan, let out a choked, audible gasp. Clara shot him a glare that could freeze water. "Ethan, is there a fire?" Ethan, pale and stammering, held up his phone, his hand trembling slightly. "Miss Ashton, I think you need to see this. It's breaking news. The Times." Clara maintained her posture, unwilling to break her professional composure from mere gossip, but the collective silence of her team was deafening. She walked around the table and snatched Ethan's phone. The headline, stark and brutal against the white background of the news app, hit her like a physical blow. Ashton Capital Scandal. Top partner confesses to massive fraud. Firm faces collapse. Below the headline, Mark's face, the polished, successful face she had curated for 10 years, stared back at her, next to a detailed byline that read, "By Nora Hayes, with additional reporting from Mark Ashton." The details of the confession were laid out in merciless clarity. The use of offshore shell companies, the deliberate misrepresentations to the SEC, the billion-dollar losses disguised as routine market corrections. The article wasn't just a report. It was a devastating narrative written with the cold moral conviction of a man laying bare his own soul. Clara's first reaction was not sorrow. It was a cold, pure, calculated, professional fury. She wasn't angry that her husband had been compromised. She was enraged that he had chosen self-immolation, that he had not attempted to fight, to bribe, or to suppress, but instead had delivered the final fatal wound himself. The affair, which she now instantly understood the significance of, Nora Hayes, investigative reporter, was merely the sloppy vehicle for this far greater crime, the destruction of their shared reputation. She knew immediately what this meant: the dissolution of their social standing, the forfeiture of their assets, the collapse of Mark's career, and the toxic shadow it would cast on her own ascent to managing partner. Her life, the stable, influential, perfectly planned legacy, had been exposed as a grotesque sham by the one person she had trusted to uphold it. She articulated, her voice surprisingly steady, though brittle as thin glass. "This is an attack. It is baseless libel by a sensationalist paper." But the lie died in her throat. She saw the credit line again, with additional reporting from Mark Ashton. He hadn't just been exposed, he had chosen to expose himself. She walked out of the boardroom without another word, leaving the stunned lawyers and analysts to digest the unprecedented news. In the elevator, descending past the polished mirrors, she saw her own reflection, the mask of the high-powered lawyer cracking, revealing a woman stripped of her primary defense, control. She didn't drive to the penthouse. She drove to a small, obscure cafe on the outskirts of Bellevue, the one place she knew Mark sometimes went to meet clients she didn't approve of. She found him there, sitting alone at a small table near the window, gazing out at the freeway traffic, a look of profound, exhausted relief on his face. He looked like a man who had survived an ordeal, not one who had engineered his own execution. When he saw her, the relief vanished, replaced by the deep animal fear of her judgment. He knew instantly that she knew everything. Clara didn't shout. She didn't cry. She sat down, pulling the chair too close to the table. She looked him in the eye, her blue irises like chips of ice. "You didn't fight. You didn't try to save us. You let her ruin you, and you helped her. You traded a 10-year legacy, our entire life, for a moment of moral vanity with a cheap distraction.
Mark tried to explain. It wasn't vanity, Clara. It was the truth. The firm was built on rot, and I couldn't perpetuate it. Rot? She scoffed, a genuine sound of contempt. We managed the rot. We contained it. We used it. That's how business works. You lost your nerve. You chose a reporter's respect over your wife's partnership. You are ruined, Mark. And worst of all, you are weak. It was the final, defining moment of their marriage. Clara's shock wasn't about the affair. It was about the weakness of choosing integrity over power. He had truly blindsided her.
Weeks bled into months. The collapse of Ashton Capital was swift and devastating, a spectacle tracked relentlessly by financial news outlets. The SEC investigation followed Mark's confession with predictable speed, and the initial wave of civil suits began to mount. Mark was forced to liquidate the majority of his non-exempt assets, the gilded cage dissolving into a pile of complex legal paperwork. The divorce from Clara was even more brutal. It was not a separation fueled by broken hearts, but by cold corporate strategy. They met in the pristine, impersonal office of Clara's high-profile divorce attorney, a room designed to maximize intimidation. Clara refused to look at him, her attention fixed only on the documents and the division of their assets, focusing fiercely on preserving her independent financial and social standing. "You have signed the dissolution of the partnership agreement, Mark," Clara's lawyer stated, pushing a final document across the mahogany table. Clara spoke for the first time, her voice dry and devoid of any residual emotion. "I have ensured that the separation of assets is legally untainted by your professional misconduct. My name is clear. You are not to contact me or attend any social functions we formerly shared for the remainder of the calendar year." She hadn't divorced a husband. She had divested from a failed venture. Mark signed the papers, feeling less like a man signing away his fortune and more like a patient consenting to the removal of a long-festering tumor. "I hope you find what you were looking for, Clara," he said, not unkindly. She finally looked at him, her beautiful, hard blue eyes reflecting only pity. "I was looking for stability, Mark. You chose self-pity and weakness. I don't mourn the marriage. I mourn the lost opportunity." She stood, her suit immaculate, her posture conveying the same professional invincibility she'd worn for a decade. She walked out without a backward glance, already calculating her next move up the ladder. Mark moved out of the penthouse and into a small rented loft in a less desirable but more authentic part of the city. He spent his days consulting anonymously for small nonprofits, using his financial acumen for ethical causes, the antithesis of his old life. He had lost status, money, and his wife, but the chronic low-grade anxiety that had plagued him for years was gone. One late afternoon, he received a coded message from Nora asking to meet. He agreed to a public park bench near the waterfront, a setting that felt open and exposed, fitting for two people who had destroyed their lives for the sake of visibility. She approached him with the quiet confidence of a reporter who had cemented her reputation. Her article, The Confession of a Capitalist, had won immediate acclaim and secured her a staff position at the Times. "You look different," Nora observed, sitting down at a respectful distance. "Lighter, perhaps. Poverty agrees with me." He smiled, genuinely. "Did you come to see if the cost was worth it?" "The cost to you was immense. The cost to the public was necessary," she corrected, maintaining the moral distance. "I wanted to thank you, Mark, not for the affair, but for the information. You didn't have to burn down your life to validate my story, but you did. It was the only truly honest thing I saw you do." He nodded, accepting the complexity of her statement. Their relationship hadn't been a great romance. It had been two damaged people using a secret connection to puncture the lies they told themselves. His confession hadn't been an act of love for her, but an act of brutal self-love, a demand for accountability. "And you?" he asked. "Are you happy with the truth?"
Nora looked out at the gray, restless water of Puget Sound. Truth is messy, Mark. It rarely makes you happy, but it sets you free from the effort of lying. She stood up, pulling her coat around her. Be well. I wish you peace. It was the final goodbye. They shared no physical contact, no wistful glance, just the shared, profound understanding of the immense, painful price of authenticity. Mark watched her walk away, disappearing into the crowd. He sat alone on the bench, stripped of his gilded life, facing a future that was uncertain, difficult, and mercifully his own. The city, once his dominion, was now simply the place where he had finally learned the value of losing everything.